Hello, and welcome to Harder Than It Looks, Parking Uncovered, a podcast to facilitate connections and illuminate real solutions to common problems within the parking and mobility industry. I'm Brian Wolf, President and CEO of Parker Technology, and I'll be your host as we speak with parking professionals from across the industry at all levels to uncover tips, tricks, and best practices to manage what we all know is harder than it looks. Parking a car. On the show today is Sarah Blouch, the CEO of CampusParc LP. Sarah Blouch is the CEO of CampusParc LP, the company formed to manage and oversee all aspects of the long-term lease and parking concession of the Ohio State University parking system. Sarah has worked in the parking and transportation industry since 1980. In her current role, Sarah is responsible for managing the shareholder investment, adhering to contractual obligations outlined in the concession agreement, establishing the vision for the company to minimize risk and optimize value, coordinating the dynamic interests of a diverse stakeholder population, managing public opinion, and taking a proactive role in environmental, social, and governance-related activities. That sounds like a really big job. Sarah, welcome to Harder Than It Looks.
Thanks, Brian.
It is great to have you. And even as I reread that bio, I'm like, man, these jobs are hard.
They are.
These jobs are really hard. And I'm so sorry. I did not practice, so I didn't get the Ohio State University in there. That might have something to do with my picture over my left shoulder.
Yeah. You're missing, Dan. I know. There's one in every crowd. I'm sorry.
We are out and about. It's true. And it's been a good 3 years, but you guys got the better of us for, seemed like 50 years in a row.
Yep. I tell you, those are exciting games too. When Michigan comes down here for home games,
people are excited. I'm sure they're also really passionate about wanting to park there and get into the game. And then, all that stuff. What I like to do with my guests, and I'm so glad I have some people that write bios and they give me their full work history. And I'm like, then it kills my first question, but you didn't do that. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
What I like to do is I like to hand my guest the mic. I tell you can go back as far as you'd like to go, take your time. And then just walk us through your history, because we will eventually, and for you, if you've been in parking since 1980, a lot of it's going to be parking, but we'll eventually get to how you got into parking and all of those things. And so I'll hand you the mic and tell us your story.
I still find it really ironic. First of all my experiences, full-time experience, has been in parking. I always wanted to be a veterinarian since I was a little girl. That was my goal. That was my dream. And I have learned since, I didn't know this at the time, but we use the Myers-Briggs type instrument in our team just to figure out how to work around with other people. And I have learned that I spend a lot of my time in possibilities and impact, very little time in facts. And I didn't do the research. And it was really hard back then to get into vet school if you were A+ student. I was a B student. I did what I had to do to get by. So I had to switch gears. And so in 79, I became engaged and I was like, I need a job, full-time job. I was going to school, but we're going to need to work. So I went to my soon-to-be mother-in-law who worked at the University of Oklahoma Credit Union. She knew the parking ladies across the hall and they happened to have an opening. And so I started as a clerk at the University of Oklahoma in the parking office.
Wow.
And just worked my way up from there. When you talk about 1980 versus 2024, I was actually talking to some of my team who are 23 and 24-year-olds who have never lived without cell phones and internet. And I'm like, we had none of that. It was all paper. We used to write things on a 5x7 card. And you had a yellow dot if you were a customer that had no tickets. You had a red dot if you had tickets. And you had a brown dot if you were something else. And I'll let you use your imagination on what those people were. But we would pack those up, move them across campus for move-in and registration, move them back. Everything was paper.
Wow.
So it's just, we've come a long way.
Come a long way. Okay. So how long were you at Oklahoma?
I was there till 1995, so about 15 years.
Okay.
And I think I was probably getting a little bored. It was fun. It was a great campus. I loved it. I did a lot on campus, not parking. I was teaching. I don't know how I found myself doing this, but I was teaching a class on rules and what not to do. And so it was fun, but I saw the job at the Ohio State come across. And I thought, well, that might be fun. And so I threw my hat in the ring and kind of tongue in cheek answered all the questions. They called me out for an interview, and rest is history. I really liked the people here. I really enjoyed the job. And I can tell you, I have never been bored a day in my life.
Yeah. Okay. So in 95, were you the director at Oklahoma?
I was.
Okay. So you came across as the director at Ohio State.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we have done some things in Oklahoma with transit. We had a shuttle bus from a remote parking lot, and then I teamed up with some folks in Oklahoma City who ran the public transit, and they were anxious to do some expansion. We were anxious to go off campus and pick up students at apartments and things, so we were actually able to get federal funds and grow the bus service at Oklahoma into a public service for the city of Norman.
Okay.
And I think everything comes full circle. So I think they've actually now stopped that because they didn't want to go through all of the things that money's tightening with federal funds. Yeah. And so they're back to being just a campus service now, I think. So when I came to Ohio State, my charge was to bring parking and transportation, which were separate entities, under one umbrella. And we did that. We brought in a lot more than that because all of those orphan things nobody wants to fund, but they all impact parking, crosswalks, traffic, events, construction. We ended up taking on and dealing with and managing. And if you fast forward to 2011, actually, I was called by the treasurer at the university and invited to a meeting. And I said, oh, okay, that's cool. What's the meeting about? Well, we're looking at privatizing parking. And I said, what's my role in this meeting? And he says, you're going to tell us where all the skeletons in the closets lie. Okay, thanks. Sounds like I'm going to my funeral, but we ended up having to unpack everything and split it all back out again. Yeah. And I wasn't really, at the time, I wasn't thinking about what am I going to do, but I really wanted to take care of my team, I think. And I have known a lot of folks in parking, and I think this is a common thread. We tend to be like a work family. You spend more hours at work with people awake at work with people than you do at home. And so you get really tight. And unwinding that was really a challenge. So I was really worried about that. And then the concessionaire, the investors tapped me on the shoulder and said, we'd like you to come work with us. And I'm like, I don't know. And the only reason actually I did it was at the time it was like this whole, they're Wall Street people. I don't want to have anything to do with them. I'm a good public servant. But they had a gentleman who was a very prominent person in Columbus that was going to be the chair of our board. And this man drove around with a license plate that said ethics, and he meant it. And so they came trotting into my office after the board of trustees awarded it. Al Laz was with them because, Laz was doing the running of the parking and the folks from QIC. And I did not go to the board meeting. We snuck dogs into the office that day. We're supposed to have them in there, but I'm like, the hell with it. What can they do to us? And so we're hanging out in my office, and these people come traipsing in wanting to go to lunch. And if they hadn't had, this gentleman's name was Bill Loda. If they didn't have Bill there, I probably would have just told him to leave. But Bill was there, and I thought, if he's hanging around these people, maybe they're not all bad. So I went to lunch and ended up agreeing to come over. And actually, it's been a very interesting experience. I think being able to work in the industry and the same company I did as a nonprofit and now do it as a for-profit has been really fascinating to just see the differences.
Yeah. Yeah. And in fact, we're going to dive into that a little bit. I've got questions.
Okay.
Okay. So what was Mr. Ethics' name?
Bill Loda.
Okay.
He used to work for the electric power plant. He was vice president there. And then he ran the transit system for Central Ohio here. And I think at that time he was probably retired from both jobs and dabbling in some other things, but he was just an amazing guy.
Yeah. So isn't that like that's like the first pro tip. It is profound for you to say, I probably would have asked them to leave if Bill hadn't been there. And so the power of Bill's reputation, the power of one person's reputation as you hand off one person to the next it made all the difference in your life.
It does. It really does. And I'm a firm believer, don't ever burn a bridge because you just never know when you might want to cross back over. And it is. I think relationships are what makes the world. I've told my son, I said, first of all, pick a business you love. You're going to spend a lot of time doing it.
Yeah.
And the second one is go out and meet people and understand what they do. And don't be afraid to ask them for help because it's all about who you know.
Yeah.
As much as what you know.
Yep. No, it is. So then even going back a little bit further when you were talking about the Wall Street types came in and you're like, what am I doing here? You had to execute a transition from, as you said, not for profit to a profit business. Like just give us a couple of minutes on what that entailed. Like, where do you start?
Right. And having a commercial operator like Laz was instrumental in this. Of course, that's what they do.
Yeah.
So they came in. So once it was awarded at, I think, the end of June, and closing day was on September 12th or September 22nd, I think. It's 21st, 72nd, something like that. So we had 4 or 5 months to get all this done, which was involved. How do we communicate with the university? How do we do all of these things? Because we're an integral part of what they do, but we're not them.
Yeah.
And so having to set that up. And then as we transition, Laz had a ton of people here. I kept asking my team, okay, they're asking me, are everything working right? Are the gates going up and down? Oh yeah, everything's fine. Not exactly. We found out that half the things weren't working properly because as a university, generally leaders don't want to hear any complaints. And so the answer when there's a problem is put the gates up. As an investment, we can't do that. We could do it sometimes, but not all the time. And so there were some stressors on the gates that we didn't have. But when then setting up our accounts receivable and our accounts payable and our data. So when people in the past, when I worked at the university, would say, how many permits did you sell? Back in the day when we had decals, we'd look in the box and say, oh, this is the last number. So here's how many.
Yeah.
And or we would look on the computer to see. Now we count active permits because people can bring permits back any time they want. So they're buying and selling, returning them all throughout the year.
Yep.
And we're only getting money when they're active. So there's a big difference between how many went out the door versus how many are actually in use.
Yeah.
So there's just a lot of nuances and then just the problem solving. And I don't fault our team back at the university. I don't fault the operators team, but quite honestly, and I don't know if this is the way it is in a city, but everything is hurry up, break, fix, get it done. Oh my God, over here, over there. They're just everywhere, putting out fires all day long.
Yep.
They don't have time to step back and go, let's do a lessons learned and how did that work? And so that's what my team does is we have the time and the focus and we have the incentive, obviously, because we're trying to make sure we preserve the investment to sit back and go, how can we do it better? At the university, the answer was go grab some people, go spend some money. It was just fix it and then move on.
Yeah.
And it's a very different approach that we use now. And we have the time, but you don't have time to do that in operations. You just don't.
Yeah, it's busy all the time. That's one of the things that we talk about a lot in Harder Than It Looks. When you talk about things that are harder than it looks, the trying to manage technology and manage everything that's going on aside from or in addition to parking the car, that's, I think, easily one of the hardest things to do for sure.
And I think they're two different skill sets. So you want in operations, you're providing customer service.
Yeah.
I love the adage. I think IPMI came up with it years ago. Parking should be a non-event. To the customer, they don't give a flip how hard it is.
Yeah.
And we all, I think, to our credit, make it look pretty easy.
Yes.
Find a parking space in an environment where there are more people that want it than can have it. In a campus, there's a rating system. If you're a faculty, you get a better permit than if you're a student. And that sends some valuing messages to people. So I think they're focused on making sure the phones are answered. You guys know this. You do this all the time. And addressing and diffusing some of the anger from people. Whereas when you're looking at analysis and new technology, it just takes a whole different skill set. And very few operations, especially on a campus, can fund that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And you can't farm it out to the other departments on campus because they are all busy doing break fix too, because stuff, you got leaders changing it used to be every 5 years. Now I think it's like every 2.5 years. And the direction keeps changing.
Yeah, that's the other thing that's really hard to cope with is you change leadership and everything changes.
Right.
Okay, maybe we should take just a half a step back for anybody that's listening that doesn't understand a concession.
Concession.
Yeah.
Like I was back in 2012.
It's a super novel concept. Mitch Daniels did it fabulously in the state of Indiana, instantly took us from probably one of the middling states to a top tier state because we got, I think, $50 billion or some crazy, or $1 billion, some crazy number when he sold the rights to the toll road in northern Indiana. So big infusion of cash. But then you've got a bigger job to make sure that cash actually earns a return.
Yeah. So when I heard about this, what's a parking concession? First of all, the challenge is I Googled privatized parking and up comes Chicago parking meters, which at the time was pretty contentious. And I am like freaking out. Oh my God, what are we going to do? Because you just don't. And it's all about how the agreement is set up. I have learned a lot over the time. And the agreement we have is challenging in that there's a lot of things that are relying on work it out. Most public entities are used to bidding things, going with the low bid. You don't work it out because that opens the door to unfavorability and just all kinds of challenges. So it's been difficult for that. Not everything is a Bible in there. It's a reference guide. And so we've had a lot of discussions with the university on how do we work through that. And we have a really good relationship at this point with them, but it's still hard. The frontline folks don't know. We got a little thing going on this week with trash cans, right? Somebody's got a trash can sitting outside of the garage over in a very busy by the student union. And they're like, it's near the garage, it's yours. It's not our trash can. And the boundaries are the walls of the garage. So we said, we will put trash cans in the garage, but this is probably not all trash from customers. It's probably they're coming out of the union from all of the fast food in there walking.
Yeah.
But the landscaping guys and the refuse people don't know.
Yeah.
And who knows, one of them might have been ticketed. There might have been something going on in the background and they're not inclined to ask. And so that's where relationships come in. I contact some people I know and say, hey, can we get them in a room together? I learned that at the university. One of the older folks that had been there a while, our parking maintenance guys and his landscaping guys were constantly, when they plow snow, somebody's filling up somebody else's just plowed ditch, what have you. He said, let's get our guys together and let's sit down with donuts and just talk. And just being able to be face to face, it makes a whole difference.
Yeah. That's funny. Okay. So the concession at the highest level is you went contract right away because that's your life. But QIC paid you
$483 million. So almost $500 million.
Okay.
And what that was, because I always thought that was popcorn and peanuts, right? At a movie. And the concession is really just an agreement. So it says for the leasing of the parking assets for 50 years, then this is the rule book. And I helped write the rule book. There's a lot of things in there. I'm like, sheets, if I'd have known I was going to do this, I might not put it up.
Well, that's right. You were on the other side. Oh my!
And not happy about it at all.
That's hysterical. You negotiated against yourself before you even knew you were negotiating against.
It was. I don't know how you would do it otherwise because I could see where people might put things in there on purpose, and that's not in the spirit of this. But it's really just an agreement that says these are the things you have to do. We have deliverables. We have things that we need to do. And the reason it's attractive to investors is it is a monopoly. There's just not a lot of parking outside the campus. It is slow, steady growth. Yeah. They don't want this high off the chart growth or the unpredictability because most of these are pension funds and they want that. Right. Grandma just want to make sure that money is there. And as I get much closer to that, I get it. Want to make sure that there's a steady income coming in to take care of needs. It works in that manner. And I think, again, there are some things. They took the Chicago parking meter concession and just cobbled ours off of that, I believe. So there's some, and that was just on-street meters. We have meters. We have garages. We have events. We have all kinds of things that don't fit that. And so it's a little crazy, but I have talked to the attorneys that we use. I said, if you guys do this again, here's some suggestions and, just to make it easier. But we figured out how to make it work. And so it really is just a lease and an agreement. And we have deliverables. The university has responsibilities. And then instead of the university getting all of the money, that goes to the investors. But the university also does not pay for any operations. They don't pay for any capital repairs. They have no risk on any of those. If somebody has a crash up in the garage, that's covered by insurance, by CampusParc. So they've divested themselves of a lot of unpredictable costs. And then they have gained that $483 million, which OSU was extremely smart. They invested it in their endowment. Everybody got a little something. There's something for faculty. There's something for students. There's something for staff. And they've earned, I think, off of that $483 million in 2012 to date. I think their website's saying 300,000 over on top. Or they've done very well.
Yeah, 300, probably 300 million.
Million. It is million. Yes.
Yeah,
right.
So it's nearly doubled. That makes perfect sense.
And when COVID hit, they didn't have to bear that cost.
Man, like that all by itself was probably okay. We could go right there. Just talk about the pressure that you felt. You were essentially operating like a private operator, right? I know our private operator
essentially
just got crushed. They got absolutely crushed.
We had to rip a lot of the operations team. My team is 16 people, and the board, we worked hard to put these folks together. I firmly believe in hiring people way smarter than I am. So I didn't want to lose any of them. And they were very good at saying, we're going to keep our team intact. But we did, unfortunately. And it's the people that can least absorb it too, which is very hard.
Yep. Super hard. And then things come roaring back, and then you got to go find those people again.
Exactly.
Yeesh.
Yeah. So it's been tough. We made it through, and we were able to hold the management team intact for our operator as well. And we've started to rebound with the employment conditions much better than they were. So it has worked, and the university is building things they never anticipated that were not in the agreement. You can't over 50 years, how do you know? So we're sitting down and saying, okay, let's talk through how do we make this happen? Yeah. Some of it, they want developers to build things. And so everybody has something they need out of this. Let's just sit down in a room and figure out what it is. And I'm sure we can figure out a way.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So now something caught my ear, and I think we've talked about this before. The university has divested itself of all the risk and all of so they don't even worry about parking now. And so then talk about how that sort of arm's length relationship comes into play when you start talking about pecking orders and you start talking about people complaining and all of that. I can only imagine because you're not part of their family anymore, that it might actually be a little harder.
It can be. So while they're out of the day-to-day parking business, they still hold the ability to make all the rules. We cannot change any rules without their approval.
Okay. I suppose that makes sense, but that's interesting.
Yeah. So but what we have now is, as people have retired and moved on, we have a lot of people who are not really that knowledgeable in how parking works, making some decisions on things. And so we have to try very hard to make sure we bring them along and say, here's what we think, why we think. I think the good news, there was a bit of emotion the first 4 or 5 years of us versus them kind of thing, because they knew me, but they didn't know who I'm working for. Who's people and what do you do? But OSU, we can't make a change in a space designation without the university's approval. We can't change the price of anything. That's pretty locked in. But without saying, hey, this one, and quite frankly, that's a problem for us just because the pricing structure never made sense. You would think on a campus with surface and garage parking that you might have a component of a permit that you then layer on one garage, 2 garage, what have you. Yeah. And we don't, and they just don't make a lot of sense. And sometimes we have a 24/7 permit for students to park overnight in the garage and all day that is cheaper than the one for students who are commuters that are not allowed to do that. So those kinds of things just happen over time. Yeah. But we're working with the university and saying, here's our plan. Here's what we think. We sponsored a study to look at comprehensive transportation, both bus walking, biking, parking, everything that has to do with it. How can we work together to help figure out how we put a good transportation system, because it is a system, together on campus that works well with the city?
Yeah.
So it isn't, we are and we aren't. So I'll tell you what does happen is when I came to Ohio State, I had this problem. The facilities and the architect's office are making all these decisions about parking and never calling parking. And so we get all the calls. And so that's starting to happen a bit again. And in the past, I would just go, I'd invite myself to meetings. And one of the director of the facilities at the time, right shortly after this, she says, "Oh, I never see you in meetings anymore." I'm like, "Because I can't just barge in anymore. You have to invite me." So we spend a lot of time going out and just what's going on, how's it going, talking to people, which has gotten harder since COVID because nobody wants to meet in person anymore. They all want to do it through Zoom or Teams.
Yeah.
And so that does make it more difficult to figure out what's happening. But we've got people dedicated to that. That's a lot of what I do. That's what I have a couple of team members that spend a lot of time doing that. And then again, that's back to the relationships, right? You're talking to the folks boots on the ground people who happen to know a few things, and you just follow the trail.
Yeah. Okay. So if you want to make a change in technology, how does that work? How do
we are allowed to do that?
Okay.
They don't want to have to dictate how we follow their rules. We just have to follow the rules.
Oh,
so a good example is when we started, it used to be federal APD, which turned into 3M, and it was obsolete. And so we went shopping for new gate equipment, and we kept them informed, but it wasn't really theirs to say what we can do and what we shouldn't. Now we're trying to work closer with them because there's an OSU app that people can get all kinds of information about their campus day. And we want parking information in there. So Bob's been working really hard with them to integrate a lot of that. And that's working too. So again, I think we're at a point, most people think we're just a department at the university.
Yeah.
We just have to work a little harder to stay abreast of all the information of things. It's all those side conversations that happen in meetings. University has tons of meetings, but it's always oh, hey, what about this? That's in the hallway when you're coming and going that we are missing. So we have a few folks that we really try to rely on at the university, and they have a concession manager that is supposed to help be that liaison to help us out.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So then riffing off of the relationships piece. So is it the university that's still making decisions about who parks where? Or is that you?
It's them. It's based on their job classification, if they're an employee, or they call it the rank, how many credit hours a student has earned. Those are the overarching rules.
Okay.
Again, those rules were created, I think we traced them back to 1930 or 40, and they haven't changed a whole lot except to get a little more complicated as one person has a situation, so a new rule would be made. So we've come up with a different way of doing it that we've been socializing for a few years, and it's going to take time. One thing that does not happen fast on a college campus is change. And so it'll take time, but they're not saying, "Hey, you, Brian, can have a pass," but they're saying, "Brian, if you're a faculty member, this is the pass you can have." And they send us a file. We put it in the system, and then when you show up, it says these are your choices. And if you don't like those choices, we do have remote low cost. But of course, nobody ever voluntarily does that very often. So they all want to park close.
Yep. Yeah. Poor podcasters that listen to every podcast hear me quote Don Charlie when he says they all want to park under their desk.
Yes. Yes, they do. And there's that triangle, right? Convenience, availability, and price.
Yeah.
We've actually gone out and asked people, rank these. Most of the time they say, well, it's all important. But I do believe that some of the frustration from the customers is because they are not getting the value for the money. We have a hunting license here. So if you're a faculty member and you buy the most expensive permit, which right now is around $1,300 a year, you don't get guaranteed any location. You have to come in and park. And we all like to park in the same place every day, almost the same spot. And so that leads to missed expectations, which leads to the hostility and the anger and the frustrations. We're working on that too with this whole system change, that if we can make the value proposition for the customer better, they'll buy it and they probably won't have as many frustrations.
Okay. And so you and your team will work through a structure, but then you're going to have to take it to the university, and the university is going to have to adopt
Correct.
it or take pieces of it.
Yeah, and on a college campus, you don't go straight to the leaders because they're not going to do anything unless there's a grassroots support.
Yeah.
So we go out to different groups and that complain and say, there are some other ways to do it. Here's the pros, here's the cons. Let's talk through it. And we try to find those, I call them champions, that will stand there and support it. And it worked when I was with the university. We were looking for raising parking rates so we could fund the bus replacement of our buses. They were old, they were icky. And I had a faculty member that was very vocal about, I don't want my parking going to that bus. I don't use it. I don't want it. And fast forward close to a year, we're standing outside the Board of Trustees meeting. He looked over at me and he says, how the hell did I get here? He was testifying on our behalf.
What a great story.
Yeah. He was a great guy. He did a great job.
Yeah. All right. So there are a couple of pearls in there for sure, right? This idea of the relationships that you form and then the grassroots. You're not the first person that's told a story about finding the most vocal critic and then spending focused time on that critic and ultimately turning them around.
And often my experience has been on campuses anyway, you're educating people one at a time. Parking's personal. We all know that, right? We all have our own needs.
Yep.
It's an infrastructure item, which is an interesting word to put with it because we don't always use it. But having been in the industry I'm in and the investors that are in this are infrastructure people, it's like a light switch, right? You expect it to work. You expect it to happen every time. Yes. And when it doesn't, it's frustrating. Unlike the electric company, you know who to call with parking. And so I do think that's probably why we all get some of the personal attention that we do.
Yep.
But if you take time to talk with them and educate them about what the choices are and the other options, and they'll listen.
Yeah.
Most of the people go, oh, I never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
So it's just hard in the heat of the moment when they're calling you all kinds of names to say, let me talk to you about that. You got to pick your time and your place. So.
Yeah. And you got to give them perspective because they see that parking spot through their lens.
Yes.
They don't see the 5 other constituents who, even if they're being fair with themselves, would say that constituent is just as worthy as they are to have that spot. That you're trying to give 5 people 1 parking spot.
Right.
And this person
under the classroom. That's right.
And this is just you're just one of 5. You're not one of 1. That comes through loud and clear almost every time.
Yeah. It's the competing demand for a limited resource is what it is.
Yep.
And the usual way we handle that in this country is capitalism reigns supreme, right? More money.
Yes.
On a college campus, it does that to some extent. But what about these people that are working 2 jobs because they can't afford? And that's what is hard. So we've always got to have some kind of a low-cost option for people. Students, we're getting students now who just don't have the money to pay for the permit. But of course, the interesting other side of this is that through COVID, we were pushing our daily and our monthly permits, which used to be really exclusively for visitors. But people had figured out, first of all, they can get around the archaic rules we have. So a student can actually park next to a faculty member if they buy the daily or the monthly. Staff who want the A permit, the more expensive to get in, can do that through these short-term permits. So we're starting to see a real shift in how people are buying it, which is good news in a way. You know, it's economically, it's almost a wash where our permits are down a little bit through COVID, about 10, 12%. But they're paying for a more expensive permit on a short-term basis. But it just tells you how people are changed their habits now in buying. They want it just in time. Oh, on Amazon, right? Y'all want Amazon on your phone for parking.
Yeah. Yeah. And the idea of paying for a resource, paying for a monthly pass when I'm only going to use it 5 or 6 times.
Exactly.
I don't think in the past we didn't do that math.
No, it's always been an annual permit, but people are not here in many cases on a day-to-day basis anymore.
Yeah. They're slicing it thinner. It's super interesting.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to shift away and go to something maybe a little bit more personal to you, but what didn't I ask you about the concession that might be interesting to somebody listening, or maybe a dynamic that you live every day that we don't really take into consideration when you've got a big university against a capitalistic convention?
Yeah, it's a challenging mix. The interesting thing about us at the moment is that we are the person that we have had work with us for company development, personnel development things, said we're a company of controversies, because we are a $500 million company run by 16 people, sandwiched in between two public entities. and on one hand, if you look at it, we're supposed to maximize the investment, but we can't change any of the rules.
Yeah.
So it's a really challenging environment at times, but I'd have to say the investors have been wonderful about understanding campuses. I don't think they fully understood them until they worked with us for a few years. Yeah. And again, it's just the pressures. There are so many wonderful people on campus and everybody wants to do the right thing. This campus is probably bigger. It's much more complex than the University of Oklahoma. It's also about double the size. Yeah. We have about 100,000 people on campus between students, faculty, staff, and then you add in the patients and the visitors and all this, because we have several hospitals on campus.
Yeah.
But it's communication, it's a clear vision, it's where do I fit into the puzzle, which is hard, which makes some of the noise on the campus side. But I think I always thought the concession was, I get it now. I absolutely see why. And in fact, COVID was probably the best thing to help illustrate the benefits of this to the campus. I did overhear one of the trustees did say, thank God we did that, because they were paying staff not to come to work during COVID, and they didn't have to pay the parking folks.
Yeah, super interesting. All right.
Yeah.
So
it's complex, but it's absolutely, when you boil it down, it's just a good business effort. And we have been able, a lot of our value that we bring is optimizing operations. We can do things that I've always loved my people, but some of them were better than others. And I couldn't, if they were in a union, I couldn't do much about it. Some of them were great in the union. I couldn't do anything about that either. We have some liberties to do things that we can do with people. The first time my CEO, when we first started, said, they're just not a good fit. I'm like, huh? Yeah, huh? You mean this isn't going to take 3 years? So it was nice.
So what I've always appreciated about you is you're always honest. You're always really transparent. And so, hearing those little tidbits behind the scenes, it's true. So some of the challenges around the union stuff and all of that it's real. And yet unions are important in certain aspects of making sure that people don't get exploited and that they're protected.
It can happen. Yeah, I totally understand it. I don't begrudge it. It's just when you have an outstanding worker that is in that group, it's all the same, and not everybody's all the same. And there's no way to really recognize those people.
Yeah.
And even union or non-union on a campus, there's a very lengthy, it's a lot of work. If you have somebody that just really isn't a good fit, it's not that they're a bad person.
Yeah.
They're just not a good fit for that role. And it takes a long time to move them on. Show them the path to freedom was what way somebody told it to me.
What's funny, maybe this does work. It could work today. I heard somebody tell a story one time where they were having a very bad boss experience. And so they actually called a recruiter and had their boss recruited for a job. Which I thought was brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. I could see that. That's smart. That's really smart.
Just being creative about ways that you move those people along. So I hope I don't scare you with I'm going to get personal, but so you have achieved some success that is rarer air as a female parking executive.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder if you could tell us about your perspective on how you were able to get there, and then what we need to do as an industry to get better about welcoming not just women, but all of I was at IPMI's Leadership Summit, and the young woman that did the keynote speaker, I cannot remember her name, but she talked about all the male and pale faces in the audience and how we need to do a better job of making the industry a lot less male and a lot less pale. So
Yep.
I'm interested in your perspective on that.
Oh, all the things that I was very early on, one of 3 women at back in when it was still the Institutional Municipal Parking Congress. That's how long ago it was. When I went to a couple of their conferences, it was like me and 3 other women, and the women were the girls working the tables. And it was very, it's uncomfortable sometimes just because, and I was young too. I was in my mid-20s, and everybody's like patting you on the head and saying, oh, isn't that nice to hear? But I've never really let myself be bothered by some of the things. I had a boss that really invaded my personal space. I don't think he did it with a bad intention. It was just really uncomfortable. So I just tried to stay away, but I just work around it. I can't fix it myself, but I can set my boundaries, work around it. And I've always just, I love, and I think the reason I love this industry is I like solving issues. I like solving problems. And so I'll just find my way around it. And I know it's a good skill. I was talking to my son one year, and I don't know, he was venting about something. So I go into problem solving mode, and he's mom, just shut up and listen. I don't need you to okay.
You're like,
yeah, I was happy to hear that, because I do have a tendency just to start doing that. So now I ask, do you need some advice, or you just need to vent? And do that in business as well. And I've just been one to get it done. I don't worry about how am I going to get it done? I try to figure out a way to make things happen and move on up. So.
Yeah. Yep. And so you've got a couple of strong women on your team.
Mm-hmm.
So
I do. Well, and it was neat. So I have a picture actually, because the incoming board chairman, wonderful man. He's been a terrific mentor as well. This was a few years back, but he was the only male in the room with myself and my CFO, who's a woman, and 2 other women that sat on our board. So we have a small board of 3 people, and he actually enjoyed it. I think we had a board dinner. He's the only guy in the room.
Yeah.
And so it was very unusual, but I do think, and we struggle with it too. Our company our office of 16 is quite diverse, but we don't look that diverse. And trying to find other people, that it's hard when you just put out a hiring. We're struggling with it like everybody else is. My board chairman now is a Black woman, and her approach to things has been awesome. She said, look, back in the 60s, she was a lawyer. Her husband had their own firm. She was recruited on boards, and she said, I knew why they asked me there. But she said, I'm taking advantage of it.
Yeah. There you go.
That's a great approach.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Okay. What can I do better with making sure that I feel I'm more inclusive, or how can I make people feel more welcome as a pale male?
I think just be you've always made, I remember back we were out in the Marina Del Mar or something at a Temecula group. So I think I met you several years back, and you're very open. You're willing to talk. You're willing to ask those pointed questions. That's a great question to ask somebody. That you might, just say, let me know. I'm trying to find ways to make people feel more comfortable.
Right.
You can't help what you are. You don't want to, right? But I also did listen in on there's a women's leadership group, WELD, they call it here. And I listened in on a seminar during COVID, and there is a book out on how do you network and bring in people that don't look like you or don't believe like you. And they said, you have to go out and look for them and then join their groups to then broaden your circle. And so I'm still trying to look at that as well, because we want to do the same thing.
Yep. Yeah. We talk about, or I'm hearing things like, you got to be intentional about your actions, right? That people don't tend to find you. You've got to go find them. And I need to go find them. Probably.
We had a great compliment. We had some folks up here that are in the investment industry for a meeting, and didn't think anything of it, but we have a pride flag that we hang every year during Pride Week, but we never took it down. So it's in one of our conference rooms. And he sent me a note afterwards, and he says, I just have to tell you how awesome it was to see that flag in your office. He said, I'm sure you can imagine in my industry that we don't see that a lot. So it's also the little things of just saying, hey, we respect differences. We're okay with it. And don't make a big deal about it.
Yeah. No, that's good. Let's conduct business.
Yes.
In the end.
Exactly.
All right. We're going to go to the lightning round. It's not really the lightning round, but I ask all of my guests the same 5 or 6 questions. So first question is, if someone in your office utters a phrase, and everybody knows this phrase, right? They're familiar with it. They're like, that originated at the desk of Sarah Blouch. Okay. Mm-hmm. So do you have a phrase that you're known for?
Yeah. And it's probably not the most flattering, but it's easier to beg forgiveness than to get permission at times.
Okay. So if somebody says that, you're like, okay, we know where that came from. That's Sarah.
Yeah. Because I was talking about a trainer I've been working with, and I might have to change my membership because he's letting me use an asset at their gym that I'm not paying for. I said, yeah, I tend to be more of a rule follower. And Val looked at me and she goes, you miss, it's easier to beg forgiveness for situational.
Yeah. No, that's good. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So then.
That's probably it.
Yeah. Okay, good. Certainly Val knows you for it.
Mm-hmm. She called me on it.
And she's probably used it against you before.
I know.
I know Val. Val's probably beg forgiveness, a woman for sure. Yeah, I get that. All right. So what's the hardest thing you've ever had to do in your life? We'll get to parking in a second.
Probably, I would say the hardest thing was my son, when he was like 23, had a really bad motorcycle wreck. And I got a call while I was at work from the nearby hospital that said, your son's been in an accident. Please come over here, park in the green garage. I remember that, which was great because you can't remember much when you hear that, right? So I called my husband, you gotta come with me. But just dealing with that, he's fine now. He's got rods from his armpits to his hips. I said, you got only maybe one life left, so let's be careful. But that was unbelievably difficult to have to deal with. I'm not a medical person, and he was in intensive care for a long time. So but it brought our family closer together as well, because we had to take care of him, and he was pretty helpless for quite a while. It was a long haul, but that was tough.
Yeah. Okay. See, I get to learn new things every and I can't imagine that's probably come up, but I probably wasn't paying as much attention as I am now. So that's
I don't think that was back in early 2000s. So he was riding the crotch rocket and way too fast in January. So it was ugly.
Yeah. That's awful. All right. So what's the hardest thing you have to do in your parking job? Maybe we've already talked.
Break up the team in 2012. That was hard.
I'm sorry. What was hard? I didn't
break up the team in 2012. When the concession happened, it was the parking versus the transportation. They didn't want any union people, and we had several who were booth attendants and things like that. And the university was fairly supportive. They said everybody can have a job, but they wouldn't tell them what it was until they committed. And unfortunately, the booth attendants became custodians because they really didn't have anything else for them, and they felt like that was a downgrade. It was very emotional. I wasn't a fan of this whole thing at the time, didn't understand it, and probably cried myself to work most days just because it was so hard. Turned out to be great, and I have found over my life when I feel like things are just totally the worst and I'm uncomfortable is when I'm learning things and growing, but it's still not fun.
Yeah.
So
okay,
that was really hard. Just picking. First of all, we had to have a meeting when they said, my team said, what's going on? I told them, they said, what are we doing? I said, we got to write down what we do. We didn't write down anything. It was all up here. And so we had to start creating processes and policy, things that we knew, but we never had written down. And it took almost a year. So that was even harder. So
yeah, it was a death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah. Yeah. We did a great job integrating. It was very hard to weave it all back out. But that was tough.
Okay. That makes perfect sense. You literally had to tear apart something that you spent all your time putting together. You did a lot of that in 2012. Like we were talking about you writing the rules on one side and then living by the rules on the other. You probably went to work confused a lot of days in 2012 and 11, 12, 13.
Yeah, it was tough. It really was. But again, back to relationships. Love certain groups on campus. I was able to write things in for them. When last came on, Steve Crash was like, what the hell is this? This attendant over at Vet Med that helps people get their dogs in and out of the car? I'm like,
that's
my retirement job one of these days.
You never know. That's funny. Okay, that's good. I like
Took
that.
care of my friends.
Again, see, we're back to the pro tip of relationships matter, and you got to take care of people because you never know when they're going to take care of you.
That's right.
That's great. All right. So if you could wave your magic wand and fix one thing in parking, only one, maybe you can have two.
Yeah. I would love people to assume positive intent on both sides. People come in, and I've read so much, and we're actually looking at trying to do a little more studies on this, but people get really weird behind the wheel of the car. And there's all kinds of studies for traffic. If you're driving down the road and somebody cuts you off, you just know they did that on purpose. And you're like, maybe they didn't even see you, right? And people come into the parking office, right? And they're yelling at our poor frontline staff, and they're saying, you did it. And they're like, we're just following the rules. Yeah. So if people could just take a minute, assume positive intent, and engage in a conversation, I think 90% of our world's problems could get solved.
No, that's really good. It's a good reminder.
It's hard, and I try to remember it daily, but I get sucked into it too.
Yeah, give grace, right? Give grace. They may not have seen you. Maybe they were in a hurry because they're on their way to a job, and if they're a minute late, they don't get their attendance bonus.
Correct. Yeah, and I will say, when Wally, my son, had his accident, after he's coming back and I'm trying to get everything settled, and I talk to a lot of people, what do we do? How do we go about this? Everybody's got something going on in their life. And you've got to remember that. Yeah. And if you can have a little compassion for the folks and just get them to calm down, I think you can usually address things.
Yeah.
But there's a few in every crowd that just doesn't make sense, and you just give up trying. But most of the time, people.
Yeah.
I would love for that to be.
Good grace. Yeah. Like noble intent. Assume noble intent. I love it. Okay. So when you're not parking cars, what do you do for fun?
I take my dogs out and wander around my little farmette. Love it.
Yeah. All right. So tell us about your dogs again. You probably got a picture there handy.
I might. Hang on. That's right. I forgot you did this video. I have 2 Great Danes and a lab. So little guys, all of them. I don't know if I have them all together, though.
And have you always had 3, or did you just get a third one?
We've pretty much always had 3 dogs. We've had lots of dogs over time, but they're my kiddos. But let's see. You put me on the spot. I don't know if I have anything.
I am so sorry. And then what I don't know is, because I've seen one of your dogs in the office, do you rotate your dogs?
Yeah, I used to have a Dee that was a little scared, so she doesn't come up. But now I've got a new one, and she's fine. The lab's fine. The only challenge I have is my male Great Dane has a separation anxiety thing. So it's really a good thing we have a disability stall in the toilet up here, because he comes with me.
Yeah, that's funny.
It's fun when you run into other people and they're like, whoa, like, he's fine.
He's fine. He's not paying attention. You do your thing, he'll do his.
You deal with human beings day in and day out. Dogs are just awesome to have around, because they're never, sometimes they talk back, but very rarely.
Yeah. No. My wife turned me into a dog person in 2004. I'd never owned a dog before that. I was adamant we didn't really need a dog, and now they're the best. Sam's
they are. My dogs are waiting at the window when I drive up every night. Nobody else in the house is there waiting at the door for me to come in. They're very rewarding, and I love watching them run out there and have fun and play. So
I love seeing his tail wag when he sees me.
Yeah,
that's
ears
my
up,
favorite
tails
part.
wags. Yep,
I love it. All right, last one. What are you most proud of?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a hard one. I think probably just rolling with the punches and I seem to have landed in really good places after all despite the trauma that it feels like. I think I'm pretty adaptable, and I love every team I've ever had the pleasure of putting together, working with has been amazing. And I tell you, I can tell you what it is. It's really I call them the kids. So a lot of the younger folks, watching them move up into their careers and really become, we got it, vice chancellor at one place. Somebody else was running the transit at Disney. It's just really cool to see them becoming themselves and the potential that they have to grow up in the world. So I like seeing my kids grow up.
Yeah. And they have you as a mentor. I've talked with several guests before about the coaching tree. Yes. The parking tree is wide and vast. Anybody that's been in for 30 or 40 years, you're gonna have proteges that probably will go beyond where you were able to go, and you can say that you were an important mentor to them.
And then it is just the industry itself. Everybody's willing to help other people. I'd never called somebody and had asked them for some advice or assistance, and they said, "Oh, I can't help you." So you're right. This industry is great that way, for sure. It really is. It's a big family too. I've made some very good friends just through parking meetings.
Yep.
Good place.
Big happy place. I like it.
Exactly.
All right. You've made it through an hour with me. And so I want you to know how much I appreciate our friendship. I appreciate all the openness that you've always displayed with me, giving me a chance to pitch my wares and or ask a bunch of questions. So thank you for that.
It's because your t-shirts are so cool. But,
listen, Heidi and her team kill it on that front. And so we're lucky to have them and lucky to have
her team kill it on the other front. So I've been very happy with what's going on. Yes.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
People.
Yeah, I'm lucky that way for sure.
Yeah, the shadow of the leader.
Yeah. When I tell them to do something, they do the opposite, and then they're in good shape. So maybe
they go with their instinct. They know what's best.
Yeah, exactly.
Good.
All right.
Great.
So thank you so much.
Brian.
Yes.
I appreciate it.
Welcome back to segment 2 of Harder Than It Looks. In segment 2, we try to expose the parking world to other things that are hard to give you all a little perspective that you're not doing a hard job alone. Today, we want to do something special in our segment. As you can probably tell, I am not Brian Wolf, and for the first time, I'll be hosting the show. My name is Claudia Lopez. I'm the Client Experience Manager here at Parker Technology. I've been with Parker for a little over 2 years. Been in the parking industry for a little over 10 years, and in customer service my entire career. I'm super excited about this opportunity, especially with our special guest today. Joining me today is Jyo Shukla. Jyo is a multi-award-winning SaaS leader and author of the highly acclaimed book, Customer Success Mindset. She has spent most of her career helping startups and enterprises across the globe build scalable, meaningful customer journeys and reap commercial benefits out of their customer-centric approach. Try and say that real quick. She is also an active mentor and volunteer for organizations supporting the professional development of women in STEM, as well as diversity and inclusion in the workplace. Jyo, welcome to Harder Than It Looks.
Hi, Claudia. It's great to be here.
I'm so excited. And we gotta love technology. Here I am in sunny Southern California in the afternoon. And Jyo, you're joining us from Australia.
I'm joining you from the slightly cold other part of the world, Sydney.
And it's crazy to think it's tomorrow morning over there already.
I know. I'm your friend from the future.
Thank you for joining us today. We'd love to take some time just to learn a little bit about you and your background and how you got to where you are. So go back as far as you'd like, and just if you can tell us briefly how you got to where you are today.
Wow, that's way far back. So I've always worked in tech. I studied tech instantly. I come from a family of lawyers. We had 3 children. I'm the oldest, and my father decided of everyone, I need to take a different path. So he decided for me to go into tech, which worked out well, but I'm the black sheep in my family because everyone else are great criminal lawyers back in India. So I studied tech in uni, but I was never really interested in coding. Like, I love coders, but I hate coding myself. It's something that I've never liked at all. What I did mean, I've been a talker. It probably comes from being from a lawyer background, but I love talking. So what I realized was that I love explaining technology. I love understanding how technology works and how it translates into real world solutions for real world problems. It sounds very cheesy when I say that, but that's what I really like doing for work. So when I graduated out of uni, I didn't know there was something called customer experience and customer success back then. Naive graduate, I joined and I did roles in service delivery and I started roles in IT service management. And to my surprise, because now I realize looking back that I liked what I was doing, so I ended up being good at it. And I had the chance to grow very quickly into managerial positions in my career. So I was senior manager at a large telco back in India when I was 24 years old. And that comes with a lot of responsibilities, a lot of failures, and a lot of learning. So I learned what they call failing forward. I learned that pretty early on in my career. I learned the art of respectfully managing people who've got so much more in age and career experience than you do. And I had a lot of good and bad learnings from all of that. And then I found my feet. So my husband and I, we started a company way back, and we used to develop what I call shitty websites and shitty software, small companies. And we continued our full-time jobs, but that grew exponentially. And we were surprised when we had our hands full and one of us had to go full-time. So I decided to do that. I decided to take that job. And then what happened was that company grew exponentially. It got to a point where it was more than we could have both and our small team could have handled. And I decided to jump into it full time. We sold to a larger firm. I became a silent partner. But I also then had the chance to be their director of customer strategy and operations, which was my foray into customer success, the world of customer success. Even though I didn't know it was called customer success back then, we didn't use the terms we do right now. It was not as structured, but I learned the art of not just building and growing a large team from scratch, working across time zones, working remotely way, way back. And I also learned the art of not just how customers come to you, but what do they stay for? What do they buy more for? And what makes them, most importantly, raving fans of what you have to offer. So that was my start into the world of customer success. And if I'm telling you that I love to talk about technology and how technology works, I was only getting started back then because I love it so much more now. I did that for 3 years, and then due to several reasons, it's a long story, I was asked to move to the States and continue my work full-time over there. And at a similar time, my husband was asked to move to the UK. So we were at this interesting juncture in our career where we didn't have kids. We could go anywhere we wanted to go. But we didn't want to go to the States for several reasons, such as spousal visa issues and longevity for our stay there because of the way that immigration is structured. And I didn't want to move to the UK because I'm a summer baby and it's just too cold there all the time. The weather being the deciding factor. We both agreed that we need to move up in our careers. And that's what we did. He quit his job. I quit where I was working, and we took on our stake in the company. And with a very calculated risk, we got our permanent residency to Australia. We decided to move here. And I think that point really excited, but it seemed like the start of a disaster because we both did realize that all the experience that we had garnered, all the growth, all the accelerated pace of growth we'd experienced at such a young age, it's all going to go down the hill and we're going to have to start from scratch because that's what all immigrants do every time they decide to choose a new home for themselves. It was a shocking realization. I guess it was head down, bum up, and put in the work. So I started from scratch. I had the chance to work for some great companies. Not being able to start from where I had left off was shocking and appalling in its various ways, as it did to me what it would do to any human being. But I decided to work my way up, and I worked, obviously, like everyone does. I worked really hard. I worked my way up. We both worked our way up. My husband did as well. But for some reason, it felt to me like it was not enough. Like I was not moving at the fast pace that I'm used to. And I had the title I wanted. I had, at one point, I had everything, seemingly everything I wanted. But I felt that something in my strategy needs to change career-wise. And I started mentoring and volunteering when I moved to Australia because I wanted to offer support to those who didn't have it, like the way I did when I first moved here. And one day I did a lot of speaking, I did a lot of mentoring. One day my husband says to me, Joe, you talk a lot about what you do and you're really good at it. And people are always asking for your slides. You should write it down. I don't know why, but for the first time, I listened to my husband. And I spent 9 exact months, just like you would. I did it with a full-time job, with my family. And I think it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I always thought that moving to another country, reestablishing my home, living away from my family was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. Then I thought having a baby is the hardest thing I've ever had to do. Nah, all of that was wrong. Writing a book is the hardest thing I've done.
Definitely the hardest thing.
In your head.
Right. I can't even imagine.
Yeah, it was, in my husband's words, I went crazy, even though it was his idea, not mine.
Yeah, but he left it up to you.
I had to write it. Look, it's my book, so I had to write it.
Yes. So let me ask you this, because that is a whole lot of new for you. What did you learn about yourself from all of that newness, new job, new role, new country? Did that teach you anything about yourself?
I was way more resilient than I thought I would be. I always thought of myself as the soft, very carefully brought up girl. I wasn't that.
That's good. That's good, yeah. And to be able to persist and move on and grow and do all that you've done from all of that's really great. Definitely. So I actually have the book right here because it's something that we read as a team. I'd love for you to maybe tell us if there was one key takeaway from all of this. I couldn't even tell you what's my favorite part because the whole book is my favorite. But if you had one key takeaway for someone that wants to read it, what would you say?
I think it would be the fact, and this is something that we're not doing, but it should always be the case, is we always serve our customers as if our biggest risk was losing our customers. We should stop operating like that. I think we should start operating with the thinking that our biggest risk is not losing our customers. It's that our customers do not become raving fans of what we have to offer to them. I'll give you an example. I have been with my current internet provider for about 3 years. Claudia, can you take a guess as to how many service tickets or calls or requests I've made to them in the last 3 years?
Well, if you've been with them that long, you probably are pretty satisfied. So I'd say very few.
1.
Wow.
Just 1. And I remember that off the top of my head because I'm so obsessed about this whole customer experience thing. But it's because I have never had a problem if there is going to be a service disruption. More often than not, I've been informed in advance. If they have plans for me that work better than my current plan, they communicate in advance. I have never had to reach out to them. And if I had to refer that service to someone, I would do that in a heartbeat. And you know what? That's how I got introduced to them. Someone told me that X company is great and you should go with them. And I have never looked back. So I think it depends on what kind of brand you are and what kind of service you offer. But sometimes there's this quiet reliability about you that keeps customers going with you and also that encourages them to bring their friends, which happened in my case. But in certain kinds of businesses, you have to these guys show value continually. But would it matter to me if my internet service provider changed? Yes, it would. And that's the answer. It does. Sometimes it happens. I don't care who gives me my phone service as long as my needs are met. But there is something special about this provider, the internet service provider that I'm talking about, that just makes me want to stay with them. So there's this quiet reliability in certain kinds of businesses that works. And that leads to advocacy. In certain other kinds of businesses, especially in the enterprise software world, we have to shout out from the rooftops every single day the value we offer to our customers. But the why we do it, the way that we do it, first of all, before I get to the why, the way we do it is that we're always promoting our product features. It's always, this is what we offer, stay with us. If we change that conversation around just ever so slightly and say, these are the outcomes, Mr. Customer, that you fulfill for your business. this is how you're able to do your job better with our product, the conversation changes because it becomes about the customer. And I think that's something that most companies are lacking at the moment. That's where customer experience needs to change. So in saying all of this, going back to what I said earlier, advocacy should be the goal, not renewal.
Yeah. I think it's funny because I'm in the both worlds, in parking and in client experience, and trying to merge the two. One of the things I've noticed is that every client is different. We have the same service, right? We do the same service. We answer their phone calls, but every client has a different goal in mind. Whether it's just for us to answer and get people in and out of their garages quickly, or whether it's to make sure that we're collecting the revenue for them, we have to listen to what is valuable for them. Not everybody is the same. And that was a key takeaway too that I took from your book, is that you can't treat everyone the same just because it's one service. Everyone has a unique and different experience based on their goals.
Absolutely. Yeah. So say you think that the same messaging for your product works for all of your customers. That's why it doesn't. That's why it's so important to turn the conversation around into what they want. You're still giving them the same messaging. Trust me, you are, because your product's the same. Like you said, Claudia, the service is the same. There's not 1,000 ways that you can twist it, but it's the language you're using that translates into tangible and intangible outcomes for customers. That's when the conversation needs to change. The way we say things, the way we do things, the way we represent things, that's what needs to change. So instead of going, oh, we've got this cool new feature that gives you free parking on your birthday. Sorry, I know nothing about the parking world. But it auto-identifies when someone's birthday is, and it just offers them a discount or a free service when they're out that day. And just those little things matter. Also, like you said, customers use your product for different things. It means different things to them, even though it's the same service. How does that translate into each customer's outcome? I think knowing that and then scaling that into language that works for your business is what's really important. And look, customer experience teams try very hard to do that, but it's not just their job. It needs to happen throughout the company. If marketing is sending communications that defeat that messaging that you're trying to push, it doesn't work that way. It's not going to work. It creates an inconsistent experience. So it needs to start. And that's why I've talked about 5-step models like Pride that help you translate those outcomes into company-wide initiatives, having a North Star, and then everyone at the company understanding how do they contribute to the outcomes of the company. And it could be departments like HR and departments like IT that feel that they have nothing to contribute to customer experience or the outcomes of their customers. That's not true. So that's why it's very important that this becomes a company-wide conversation.
Yeah. And that in and of itself is hard to get all the departments thinking in the same direction, right? Customer focused, customer-centric in each of their individual roles, for sure. What would you say is the hardest part about what you do?
It's getting people to understand how simple it is to say what I had just said in the answer to your last question, how hard it is to translate and continually maintain that momentum of customer centricity. I think that the issue that I face is that every company I work with or every company I consult for, they say, oh, we are customer centric. We love our customers. We know why our customers love us. And customer centricity does not come from you saying you're customer centric. It comes from your customers saying that we love what you do and the way you do it. And it shows and translates in the outcomes. I'll give you a simple example. Let's say that most of your sales are coming not from new business, but they're coming from referrals. And you have a way of measuring that. That is a very complicated system to put in place. That is one of the most complicated things that I've probably worked a company through. Once you have that in place, you have a measure of advocacy, because how much new business you're getting through the power of referrals translates into how many of your existing customers are advocates of your brand. Yeah. It's one of the hardest systems to set up, because of the way that data is structured, because of the way that companies are structured, because of the way people operate with different mindsets. That's probably the hardest things I've had to do. And it's the hardest thing I've had to explain, not just to a room full of leaders as to why they need to do this, but also in the 3 months that I had with that company, consulting for them, working through the processes that they needed to put into place. The change management, I think humans are naturally resistant to change. And I know that from my personal stories, helping people work through that change and then translating that into a tangible outcome. And then the hardest bit is making sure they maintain that outcome. They keep working in the same way and not fall back into old practices.
Yeah. I know that for me, one of the things that we really rely on too is just feedback. If people are happy, they typically don't give you the feedback. So you got to draw it out of them. And you don't want to rely on surveys or emails because people get so busy. They don't look at their emails are piled up high. They don't get to it in time. So I think those just in your day-to-day interactions, asking the right questions and getting their perspective of, do they like what they're seeing? Do they think that we could change? A lot of that has come just from our interactions. So do you have any suggestions for the best way to engage someone in giving you feedback?
I think that we're all suffering from what I call survey fatigue. And that's why there's this whole conversation about whether NPS surveys or any kind of surveys really work anymore. I love what you said about working it into your conversation. I think that one way is, I'm a full believer of never letting the human touch go away in your business. So if you're having conversations with customers, working your way into through smart questions as to what they're feeling, how they're feeling, not just about your product, but about their goals, and then working that into outcomes for your product, that really works. Now, because we can't have conversations all the time with all of our customers, I think there has to be some sort of digital system. If surveys don't work for you, you're not a fan of them, that's okay. There's other ways to do it as well. But I will say the surveys are not dead, just as a side note. They are not dead. We're suffering from survey fatigue, but the right surveys sent to the right people at the right time still work. And then obviously it depends on how you're using them. If they go into a black hole and you're doing nothing with them, your customers will probably never fill out another survey for you. But coming back to the main conversation, I feel like, yes, when you have a way of working it into the conversation with your customers and really understanding their experience, real conversations come with a lot of real context. But then if you're in a situation where you don't talk to all your customers all the time, which is mostly the case with us, right? Think of digital means that emulate human interactions. And when I say emulate human interactions, they don't go, "Hi, Bob." That's not personalization. They emulate the emotion of real human interactions. If you're sending out, rather than sending out a stock standard survey to your customers, if you're doing it digitally, try and segment your customers based on what data you have on them in the past. So say you've got a bunch of customers that you think might be unhappy with your product or service. And that data could come from your service desk or ticketing systems or whatnot. If they show that they're likely to be someone who we'd call a detractor on an NPS survey, and you have to send out a survey to them, send a different kind of survey. And technology works in wonderful ways. Maybe the survey looks like it's coming from the CEO of the company. So they know that someone really cares about them. Someone really cares about what they have to say. So even if you're not able to emulate human conversation, even if you're not able to have a human conversation with every single one of your customers, when you're doing it digitally, do it in a way that digital interaction showcases that something about that customer that prompts them to respond. And that something could be anything. What I took was a very simple example of a bunch of people being dissatisfied with your product or service in the past. Their surveys have to look very different from someone you don't know or someone who's very happy. And if you've got a customer segment that there's a bunch of people that you don't know about, pick up the phone and have a conversation with them. Go and have a coffee with them, because there shouldn't be a single customer that you don't know about.
That's great advice for sure. Is there anything that I haven't asked that that I should have asked, or anything you would like to share about your role, your journey, how it is that you've come to where you are or how it makes it difficult?
I think that when we're going through things, it seems like it's very hard, which is why I'm very against giving advice like, oh, this too shall pass. There is a reason why I say that is shit advice, because for someone who's going through something, they don't think that this is going to pass, even though it will. So if you see someone in a situation where they're going through a hard time in their career or in their personal lives, and we have a lot of that happening at the moment, you might see your customers going through layoffs, and you might see your colleagues going through something difficult in their personal or professional lives. It's very important to be empathetic, and please do not tell them that this too shall pass. That is my only piece of unsolicited advice to anyone trying to help or work with someone who's going through a hard time.
I can totally empathize with that and agree that sometimes all they need is a listening ear and know that they're being heard. That's great. That's great. Jyo, it has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me today. It was quite insightful. I hope our listeners got a taste of your journey and why your role really is harder than it looks. I think most people just blanket customer success as a very cushy job. It is quite complicated, as I'm learning myself. So I do appreciate you joining me from down under into the future.
I appreciate the conversation, Claudia. You're a wonderful host. I couldn't tell you're doing this for the first time. You're a pro. You should do this more.
Okay, that's a wrap on this episode of Harder Than It Looks, Parking Uncovered, presented by Parker Technology. Please leave us a review if you liked what you heard. Make sure you tune in next month as we continue to uncover tips, tricks, and best practices to manage what we all know is harder than it looks: parking a car. Bye for now.